The first thing Kevin Reed saw when he opened his eyes wasn't a doctor. It wasn't a nurse, or a co-worker, or even the pale white ceiling of the hospital room. It was Claire Bennett. She was sitting in the chair beside his bed, still wearing her work blazer, her hands folded in her lap around a small wooden box. The kind of box he hadn't seen in 5 years. The kind he thought was gone forever, packed away somewhere after the funeral, lost between condolence cards and casserole dishes left by neighbors who didn't know what else to do. That box had belonged to Naomi. Claire looked up when she heard him stir. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She was the CEO of Bennett Design, the woman who ran Monday briefings with 12 slides and 0 small talk. The woman who had never once stopped by his desk in 3 years of working under the same roof. And yet here she was, 3 in the morning, hospital room 214. She set the box gently on the edge of his bed and said in a voice much quieter than he'd ever heard from her, "There's something I should have told you a long time ago. If you're new here, this channel is where we tell stories about real love, real loss, and the quiet courage it takes to start over. Hit subscribe and come back for more. Now let's get into it." Kevin Reed was the kind of man who never asked for help. Not because he was proud, though maybe he was a little, but because asking felt like admitting that something was wrong. And if something was wrong, then Ava would notice. And if Ava noticed, she would worry. And the last thing Kevin wanted was for his 9-year-old daughter to spend one more minute of her childhood worrying about anything at all. So he carried everything himself. He woke up at 5:30 every morning to pack Ava's lunch before she got out of bed. He worked his full shift as an engineering manager at Bennett Design, answered emails on his commute home, and still made it back in time to help with homework, cook dinner, and read one chapter of whatever book Ava was obsessed with that week. On weekends, he fixed the leaking gutter above the front porch, repainted the hallway, and kept the small yard in the kind of shape that Naomi would have appreciated, neat but never too perfect. Naomi had liked things lived in. She used to say a house that looked too clean meant nobody was having enough fun inside it. She had been gone for 5 years now. Naomi Reed had died of a rare autoimmune disease 3 months after Ava turned 4. The illness had moved fast, faster than any of the doctors had initially warned. And by the time Kevin understood what they were actually up against, there was very little time left for anything except being present. He had taken every hour of leave he could. He had held her hand through every bad night. He had told her on the last morning that they were going to be fine, that he would make sure of it. He had kept that promise the only way he knew how, by working harder, sleeping less, and making sure Ava never saw him fall apart. At Bennett Design, Kevin was well-liked and quietly respected. He did his job, met his deadlines, and didn't make noise. He was not the kind of employee anyone would describe as struggling, which was exactly how he wanted it. Claire Bennett was everything Kevin was not, at least on the surface. She ran the company her father had founded with a precision that made senior staff nervous and junior staff terrified. 35 years old, composed in every public setting, rarely seen without a purpose. No one at Bennett Design knew much about her personal life. That was intentional. What nobody in that office knew, what Kevin himself did not know, was that Claire Bennett had been Naomi's closest friend since their sophomore year of college. It happened on a Tuesday. Kevin had skipped breakfast that morning, same as Monday, same as the Friday before that. There had been a project deadline pushing into the week, and somewhere between getting Ava to school and making it to the 8 o'clock stand-up, eating had simply fallen off the list. He told himself he would grab something after the 11 o'clock meeting. He always told himself that. He never made it to the 11 o'clock meeting. Halfway through a presentation in the third-floor conference room, Kevin set down his marker, gripped the edge of the whiteboard, and went down. No warning, no dramatic moment, just a quiet collapse the way exhausted things tend to go, not with a crash, but with a slow surrender to gravity. He woke up in room 214 at Mercy General with an IV in his arm and Claire Bennett sitting 3 feet away. For a long moment, he thought he was still unconscious. She looked different outside the office. Still composed, but the kind of composed that costs something. The kind that came from effort rather than ease. Her blazer was wrinkled at the sleeves. There were faint shadows under her eyes that no amount of professional polish could fully hide. She had been there for a while. "Ava," Kevin said. His voice came out rougher than he expected. "She's fine," Claire said immediately. "I picked her up from school. She had dinner. She's asleep in the family waiting room down the hall. One of the nurses brought her a blanket." Kevin stared at her. "You picked up my daughter." "Your emergency contact is your brother in Atlanta. I couldn't reach him. Ava's school had my number listed as a secondary contact." She paused. "Naomi added me. Years ago. I never had it removed." Kevin went still. He hadn't known that. He tried to think back to the paperwork, to the enrollment forms, to those first blurry months after Naomi died, when he had filled out 100 documents on autopilot and retained almost none of it. Naomi had planned for this. She had put Claire's name on a form and never mentioned it. And for years, that small decision had sat quietly in a school filing cabinet waiting. He didn't know what to say to that. He wasn't sure there was anything to say. Claire reached into the bag beside her chair and placed the wooden box on the edge of his bed. It was small, about the size of a shoebox made from dark walnut with a simple brass latch on the front. Kevin recognized it immediately. It had sat on Naomi's reading table for years, the kind of object so familiar it had become invisible. After the funeral, he had assumed it was lost in the chaos of those first weeks. He had never gone looking for it. "Naomi gave this to me," Claire said, "the week before she passed. She asked me to hold on to it until the right time." She folded her hands in her lap. "She also asked me to tell you something. Several things, actually, but she made me promise to wait until you were ready to hear them." Kevin looked at the box. He did not reach for it. "She left 4 letters inside," Claire continued. "One for you, one for Ava, one for me, and one with no name on it, just a note saying it should be opened when all 3 of us are in the same room." She let that sit. Then she told him everything else, the flexible scheduling she had quietly arranged so he could leave early on the days Ava was sick. The employee education fund she had created and made sure Ava qualified for. The 2 occasions she had intervened when budget cuts threatened his position without ever letting his name appear in the decision. 5 years of small, invisible decisions. All of it done from a distance. None of it ever spoken aloud. "I didn't want you to feel like a charity case," she said. "And I didn't want you to think any of it came with conditions." Kevin looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked back at the box. He didn't open it. He just rested his hand on the lid and left it there. He was discharged 2 days later with a folder of instructions about rest, regular meals, and reduced stress, none of which felt particularly achievable. Ava held his hand the entire walk to the parking lot. She didn't let go until they reached the car. Claire drove them home. Kevin didn't ask her to. She simply appeared at the discharge desk with his coat and Ava's backpack, and the moment felt too exhausted to argue with. On the drive, Ava sat in the back seat and told Claire about her science project. Claire asked questions, real ones, not the performative kind adults used to seem interested. By the time they pulled up to the house, Ava had decided with the uncomplicated certainty of a 9-year-old that she liked Claire very much. Kevin waited until Ava was in bed before he said what he actually needed to say. "You should have told me." He was standing in the kitchen doorway. Claire was at the counter rinsing the mugs she'd used to make tea neither of them had fully drunk. "About Naomi. About knowing her. About all of it." Claire turned off the faucet but didn't turn around right away. "I know. 5 years," he said. "You watched me from across that office for 5 years and never once said her name to me." "Yes." "Why?" She turned around then. She looked for the first time since he'd known her genuinely uncertain. "Because every time I saw you and Ava, I thought about the last time I saw Naomi. The last real conversation we had, and I couldn't—" She stopped, pressed her lips together, started again. "I wasn't ready, and then enough time passed that I didn't know how to begin." Kevin was quiet for a moment. The anger was still there, but it had shifted shape, less like heat, more like weight. "She wrote me a letter," he said finally. "In that box. She wrote all of us one. I haven't opened it." Claire nodded like she had expected that. "She said you wouldn't, not right away." He almost smiled at that. Almost. He picked up the wooden box from the kitchen table where it had sat since they got home and carried it to the bookshelf in the living room. He set it between a photograph of Naomi and a ceramic mug Ava had painted in second grade. He looked at it for a moment, then he stepped back. "You can come by on weekends," he said. "If you want." Ava would she'd like that. He paused. "But that's the only reason I'm saying it. Because of Ava." Claire picked up her bag from the chair by the door. "I understand." She left without making it into more than it was. Kevin stood in the living room and looked at the box on the shelf. It sat between the photograph and the mug like it had always belonged there, quiet, patient, waiting for him to be ready. He wasn't. Not yet. Claire came by the following Saturday, and the one after that, and the one after that. It started small. She helped Ava finish a school project about family history. A poster board covered in photographs, handwritten captions, and a hand-drawn family tree that Ava had been putting off for 2 weeks. Claire sat at the kitchen table with a glue stick and a pair of safety scissors and took the whole thing seriously in a way that made Ava beam. When Ava asked if Claire could be on the poster, Claire looked to Kevin first. Kevin gave a small nod. Ava drew her in with a purple marker, right next to Naomi's photo, and labeled her Claire, Mom's best friend. Neither adult said anything about it. They both looked at the poster for a moment longer than necessary, then moved on. The following weekend, Kevin taught Claire how to make Naomi's noodle soup. It was a simple recipe, one Naomi had pulled from her grandmother's kitchen and adjusted over years until it was entirely her own. Kevin knew it by heart. He stood at the stove and talked Claire through each step without looking at her, measuring nothing, explaining everything. Claire stood beside him and paid attention the way she paid attention in meetings, completely without interruption. When they sat down to eat, Ava said it tasted right. That was the best review either of them could have hoped for. But every time the space between Kevin and Claire grew comfortable, one of them pulled back. It happened reflexively, like touching something warm and lifting your hand before you'd decided to. Kevin's fear was specific. He worried that getting close to Claire meant slowly replacing Naomi. Not in any dramatic way, but in the quiet, everyday way that mattered more. The way a habit becomes a replacement. The way a familiar voice starts to fill a silence that used to belong to someone else. He wasn't ready for that. He wasn't sure he ever would be. Claire's fear was different, but equally stubborn. She had begun to feel something she didn't have a clean word for. Something warmer than obligation, something more complicated than friendship. And it frightened her because she couldn't tell whether it was real or whether it was just the long shadow of a promise she'd made to a dying woman. She didn't trust her own feelings enough to act on them. At the office, things became harder. People noticed. Of course they did. Offices always noticed. A few comments filtered through the break room, the kind that sounded casual but weren't. "Kevin's been getting a lot of flexibility lately. Must be nice to have the CEO's attention." Kevin heard one version of it secondhand and didn't say anything to Claire directly. Instead, he quietly filed a transfer request to the infrastructure team he wanted to stand on his own record. Wanted no one to be able to question Claire's professional judgment on his account. He did it through standard HR channels without explanation, without telling her. Claire noticed the change within a week. She saw him stop coming by her office after meetings. She saw him stop holding the elevator. She watched the small, familiar rhythms between them quietly disappear, and without any explanation from Kevin, she interpreted it the only way the available evidence allowed. He had decided this was a mistake. He had let her in and then thought better of it. She gave him space. She was very good at giving people space. It was the one skill they had both spent years perfecting. Ava's birthday fell on a Sunday in October. Kevin made pancakes in the shape of stars, which he had been doing since she turned 5, and which he would probably be doing until she left for college. Ava came downstairs in her pajamas, saw the plate, and declared it the best morning of her life, the same thing she said every year. Claire arrived at 10 with a wrapped gift and a grocery bag. She had asked Kevin the week before what Ava needed. He had said she didn't need anything. Claire had shown up anyway with colored pencils, a sketchbook with a hardcover, and the ingredients to make Naomi's noodle soup because she had practiced it 3 times at home and wanted to get it right. After lunch, Ava looked at the wooden box on the living room shelf. She had looked at it before. Kevin had seen her do it standing in front of it the way kids stand in front of things they want to ask about but aren't sure they're allowed to. Today, she finally asked. "Dad," she said, "what's in the box? Did Mom leave something for me?" Kevin set down his coffee. He looked at the box. He had walked past it every day for weeks, had straightened the shelf around it, had once dusted the lid without opening it. He had told himself he was waiting for the right moment. He understood now that there was no right moment. There was only Ava asking. He brought the box to the kitchen table and opened the latch. Inside were 4 envelopes. The first had Kevin's name in Naomi's handwriting, slanted, unhurried, the same way she had written grocery lists and birthday cards, and the note she used to tuck into his jacket pocket when he worked late. The second had Ava's name. The third had Claire's. The fourth had nothing written on it at all, only a small slip of paper tucked beneath the flap. "Open this one last. When all 3 of you are in the same room." Claire was already in the room. Nobody said anything about that for a moment. Kevin gave Ava her envelope. He opened his own. Claire held hers in both hands and did not open it yet. Naomi's letter to Ava was gentle and specific in the way only a mother's letter could be. She told Ava that loving someone new did not mean forgetting the people who came before. She said the heart was not a room with limited space. It was something that grew to hold whatever it was asked to carry. Ava read it slowly, her lips moving slightly over the harder words. When she finished, she folded it carefully and held it against her chest. Kevin's letter was shorter. "I know you waited to open this. You always do. You sit with things until you run out of reasons not to look. That's not strength, Kevin. That's just a longer way of being afraid." He exhaled a short, quiet breath that was almost a laugh. He folded the letter and set it face down on the table. Ava slid Claire's envelope across the table without being asked, the way children do things that adults have been overthinking. Claire opened it. She read it once, then again. Naomi had seen something in Claire that Claire had spent years convincing herself wasn't visible. The letter didn't ask her to replace anyone or fulfill any role. It only asked her not to refuse her own happiness when it arrived. Claire pressed the letter flat against the table and didn't speak for a long moment. Then she looked at the 4th envelope. "She planned for this," Claire said quietly. "She knew we'd all be here." "She knew a lot of things," Kevin said. Neither of them reached for the 4th envelope. Not that night. Kevin picked it up, looked at it once, and placed it back in the box. He closed the latch. Before Claire left that evening, Kevin stood in the doorway and said, "I don't think what's happening here is just about a promise she made you keep." Claire looked at him. "No," she said. "I don't think it is either. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a resolution. It was just 2 people admitting for the first time that something real was there and agreeing without saying so directly to move toward it carefully." The memorial was held on a Thursday evening at Mercy General, in a small garden courtyard the hospital kept for exactly this kind of occasion. Stone benches, a few planters of late-season flowers, a podium nobody particularly wanted to stand behind. Kevin had attended every year since Naomi died. He always brought Ava. They always stayed for the whole thing and left without talking much on the drive home. It was a ritual that hurt in a specific, manageable way, the kind of pain that had become familiar enough to carry. This year felt different before it even began. He saw Claire from across the courtyard when they arrived. She was standing near the far bench alone in a dark coat he hadn't seen before. She gave him a small nod. He nodded back. He did not walk over. The program ran for 40 minutes. Kevin heard very little of it. He was thinking about the last time Naomi had sat outside in the evening, how she had complained about the mosquitoes, and then immediately said she didn't actually mind them. On the drive home, Ava was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Dad, are you avoiding Claire?" Kevin kept his eyes on the road. "What makes you ask that?" "Because she was there tonight and you didn't talk to her. And you've been canceling stuff." Ava pulled at a loose thread on her jacket sleeve. "Is it because you're scared of forgetting Mom? Or because you're scared that you could be happy without her?" Kevin didn't answer right away. He had not expected that question from a 9-year-old. He was not sure he had expected it from anyone. He thought about it for the rest of the drive. He thought about it while Ava got ready for bed, while he washed the dishes, while he stood in the living room in front of the bookshelf and looked at the wooden box sitting between Naomi's photograph and the ceramic mug. He had been treating grief like a proof of love, as if the ongoing weight of it meant the marriage had mattered, as if the day he felt lighter would be the day he had finally betrayed her. He had not let himself think about it that clearly before. It was easier somehow when it stayed formless. 3 days after the memorial, Claire came by the office. She stopped at his door, knocked once, and stepped inside. "I heard you put in a transfer request," she said, "to the infrastructure team." Kevin set down his pen. "It's not what it looks like." She waited. "People have been talking," he said, "about the scheduling flexibility, about the education fund. Someone connected the dots, and it got loud enough that I heard it secondhand." He looked at her steadily. "I don't want anyone thinking your decisions are influenced by whatever is or isn't happening between us. I'm good at my job. I want to keep it that way on my own record." Claire was quiet for a moment. "You could have told me that." "I know. Instead of just disappearing." "Yes." She looked at him for a moment longer than felt comfortable. Then she nodded and left. Kevin thought she had understood. He thought that was enough. He was wrong. That evening at the memorial follow-up gathering the hospital hosted for families, Kevin arrived to find Claire already there, standing at the far end of the room near the windows. He saw her. She saw him. He held her gaze for a moment, and then someone called his name from across the room, pulling him into a conversation he couldn't immediately exit. By the time he looked back, Claire had turned away. He never made it to her side of the room. What Kevin didn't know was that earlier that same day, before he had said a word to her about his reasons, a colleague had casually mentioned to Claire that his transfer request had already been approved, effective the following month. Claire had already seen him pull back at the office. She had already watched him cancel weekends without explanation. She had already stood across a courtyard at a memorial while he looked at her and did not come over. And now the transfer was done decided before he'd ever explained himself. The evidence didn't need to be interpreted. It simply accumulated. She found him near the exit at the end of the evening. Her voice was even, professional. "I've been thinking about the community project in Portland," she said. "They've been asking me to come out for 6 months. I think it's a good time to go." Kevin felt something drop in his chest. "How long?" "6 months. She reached into her bag and took out the wooden box. She placed it in his hands carefully, like something that needed to be held. "The 4th envelope is still inside." She paused. "I kept my promise to Naomi. Whatever happens next shouldn't come from that." She looked at him once more, clear-eyed, steady. Then she walked out. Ava, standing beside him, slipped her hand into his. She reached into her jacket pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper, a drawing she had made that afternoon of the 3 of them sitting around the kitchen table, dinner between them, everyone mid-laugh, and walked it over to Claire just before the door closed. Claire took it, looked at it for a long moment. Then she left. Kevin stood in the doorway with the wooden box in his hands and understood with a clarity that arrived too late and too completely that he had built his silence so carefully it had become indistinguishable from a decision. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in the living room with the wooden box on the coffee table in front of him and the lamp on low the way he used to sit when Ava was a newborn, and the only way to get through the 3 o'clock hour was to not fight it. The house was quiet in the specific way houses get quiet after something has shifted. Not peaceful, but hollow. He had opened the box once on Ava's birthday and taken out 3 of the 4 letters. The 4th envelope was still there, sitting at the bottom with its blank face and its single instruction. He picked it up, turned it over, set it back down, picked it up again. He opened it. Inside was not a letter. It was a photograph, small, slightly worn at the corners, the kind of photo that had been handled many times over many years. 3 people on a train, a younger Kevin, a younger Naomi, and Claire, all of them mid-laugh at something that had happened just outside the frame. Kevin remembered that trip, a long weekend during the 2nd year he and Naomi were together when their whole group of friends had taken the overnight train upstate. He hadn't thought about it in years. On the back of the photograph, in Naomi's handwriting, You always knew who Claire was. You just haven't let yourself remember. Kevin sat with that for a long time. He thought about Ava's question from the drive home after the memorial. Are you scared of forgetting Mom? Or scared that you could be happy without her? He finally let himself answer it honestly. Both. He had been afraid of both things at once. He had decided somewhere in the long blur of the years after Naomi died that grief was the price of love, that to carry it faithfully was to prove the love had been real. He had worn the weight of it like a form of loyalty, and somewhere along the way the weight had become the point. He heard Ava's door open down the hall, small footsteps. She appeared in the living room doorway in her pajamas, squinting against the lamp. Dad, why are you still up? Couldn't sleep. He held up the photograph. Come here. She padded over and climbed onto the couch beside him. She looked at the photo. That's you and Mom, she said. And Claire. Yeah. You all look happy. We were. Ava leaned against his arm. Dad, I miss Mom every day, but when Claire's here, the house doesn't feel as quiet. She paused. I don't think that's wrong. Kevin put his arm around her. It's not wrong, he said. I think I just needed to hear you say it. He sat there with his daughter and the photograph until Ava fell back asleep against his shoulder. Then he looked at the lamp, at the box, at the photograph one more time. He knew what he needed to do in the morning. The going-away gathering was held in the community garden 2 blocks from Bennett Design. Claire's idea because she had helped establish it 3 years ago and thought it was a better place to say goodbye than a conference room with a sheet cake. Kevin and Ava arrived late enough that most of the staff had already cycled through their handshakes and drifted back toward the office. Claire was standing near the raised beds at the far end of the garden, talking to 2 members of the Portland project team. She saw Kevin and Ava come through the gate. She finished her sentence, excused herself, and walked over. Ava immediately reached up and took her hand. Claire looked down at her, then up at Kevin. I need to tell you something, Kevin said, about the transfer request. She waited. I filed it because people were talking about whether my position was secure because of your involvement. I didn't want anyone to question your judgment on my account. He kept his voice level. I should have told you that when I filed it. I didn't. That was wrong, and I'm sorry. Claire was quiet for a moment. So it wasn't me pulling away, no. He looked at her directly. I know that's what it looked like. I gave you every reason to read it that way. That's on me. She exhaled slowly. Something in her posture shifted, not dramatically, but enough. Kevin reached into his jacket pocket and took out the photograph. He held it out to her. She took it, looked at it, turned it over and read the back in Naomi's handwriting. Her expression moved through several things at once. Grief, recognition, something quieter underneath both. She kept this, Claire said. She kept it in the box, in the 4th envelope. He paused. I think she wanted me to find it when I was ready to actually look. Claire handed it back carefully like it belonged to him, which it did. Kevin held it for a moment, then said what he had come to say. I don't want you to stay because of a promise you made to Naomi. That part's done. You kept it for 5 years and it mattered, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. He looked at her steadily. But that's not why I'm here. He told her about the noodle soup she had practiced 3 times before getting it right. About the way she had sat with Ava's school project like it was the most important thing in the room. About the morning he had come downstairs and found Claire's handwriting on a sticky note on the coffee maker. You're out of filters. I left some in the cabinet. And had stood there reading it twice for no reason he could explain. You're not a replacement, he said. You're not a consolation. You're Claire. And that's the only reason I'm standing here. Claire looked at him for a long moment. Around them, the garden was quiet, late morning light, the smell of soil, a few sparrows moving through the raised beds. I've been in love with you for longer than I'm comfortable admitting, she said. And I spent a very long time convincing myself that made me a bad person. It doesn't. I know that now. She was still going to Portland. That hadn't changed. The project was real, the commitment was real, and she was not the kind of person who walked away from something she had said she would do. Kevin wasn't asking her to. 6 months, he said. 6 months, she agreed. Ava, who had been listening to all of this with the patient attention of someone who had already figured out the ending, looked up at Claire and said, "We'll save you a seat at dinner." Claire laughed, a real one, unguarded, the kind Kevin realized he hadn't heard from her before. She crouched down and held Ava for a long moment. When she stood back up, she and Kevin looked at each other across the small distance that remained between them. He didn't close it, not yet. But he didn't step back either. That was new. 6 months later, Kevin and Ava drove to Union Station on a Saturday morning. Ava had been working on the welcome sign since Thursday. It was made from a piece of poster board left over from her school project, decorated with colored pencils and a drawing of the community garden. In large, uneven letters, it read, "Welcome home, but you have to cook dinner this time." Kevin had not suggested any edits. The train was 12 minutes late. Ava held the sign up the entire time without being asked. When the doors finally opened and passengers began filing onto the platform, she stood on her toes and scanned the crowd with the focused intensity of someone conducting a search operation. Then she dropped the sign and ran. Claire caught her laughing, one bag sliding off her shoulder as Ava hit her at full speed. She held on and pressed her face into the top of Ava's head for a moment, eyes closed like she was confirming something she had been waiting to confirm for a long time. When she looked up, Kevin was standing a few feet away. She straightened. She looked at him the way people look at each other when they have exchanged enough letters and enough short phone calls to know that something has remained intact across a distance, but still need to verify it in person. Kevin reached out and took her hand. Not tentatively, not as a question. Just took it and held it the way you hold on to something you've decided you're not letting go of again. A year after that, on a Sunday afternoon in October, the three of them drove out to the community garden with a flat of flowers, a slightly lopsided homemade cake, and a folding table borrowed from a neighbor. It was Naomi's birthday. They planted the flowers she had loved, most deep purple cone flowers, the kind she used to grow in pots on the apartment balcony before they had a yard. Ava read aloud from a list of things she wanted her mother to know, written in the sketchbook Claire had given her. Kevin spoke for a while, too quietly, not performing anything for anyone, just talking to Naomi the way he used to talk to her at the end of a long day. Claire sat beside them and listened, and cried a little, and didn't apologize for it. They ate the cake even though Ava had burned one corner. They told stories. They laughed at the one about the mosquitoes. That evening, back at the house, Kevin cooked and Ava did homework at the kitchen table, and Claire sat in the chair by the window reading through the notes Naomi had written in the margins of an old cookbook she had found in a box in the garage. Small observations, substitutions, occasional complaints about recipes that didn't account for the fact that not everyone owned a stand mixer. Kevin looked at the kitchen and thought about how quiet it had been for so long. How he had told himself the quiet was fine, manageable, survivable enough. He understood now that he had been wrong about what enough meant. A family was not the thing you recovered. It was the thing you kept building, carefully, imperfectly, from whatever love had managed to stay. Moving forward doesn't mean leaving someone behind. Sometimes it's the truest way to honor what they gave you by letting that love become the foundation for something new, instead of the ceiling that keeps you from growing. Kevin spent 5 years believing that holding on to the weight was the same as holding on to Naomi. It wasn't. The weight was just the weight. Naomi was in the photograph on the shelf in the recipe Ava said tasted right, in the 4 letters she took the time to write when she still had time to write them. She was in the way Kevin finally reached out and took someone's hand and didn't let go. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever carried something alone for too long, or talked yourself out of something good because it didn't feel like the right time, you're not alone in that. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. We'll be here every week telling the ones that remind us what it actually looks like to start again.